Morning.
Morning.
All right, I thought I would start this morning with looking at our schedule and talk about that a little bit. Next week is Holy Week, so I wanted to. We'll take a break next Tuesday, so we won't have class, so that we can all focus on Holy Week and what's happening there. So what I'd like to do this morning is we have two more assignments left in preparing for the your second passage from John to preach. So what I would like to do this morning is I want to cover those last two assignments. We'll talk again a little bit about preaching narrative. And if you have any questions on that or things that you want to discuss there, I'll talk about the primary matters assignment as well. And then the sermon document assignment, preaching and narrative. And then I think that's probably all we'll be able to cover. Then I want to give you next week, we can all focus our attention on Holy Week. And then we'll get together the week after that, and we can discuss some other things. Notice I have a target to get our second sermons preached by the end of April, so that we can start Module 3 in the middle of May, okay? And so I think this is doable for us. And, you know, if there's a concern, let me know. But we discussed with Pastor Bobby some options for Module 3, because we really want to make progress and move towards that, so we can get to that next module and talk about poetry together, because I know you all want to know how to do poetry so that you can write poems to your wives. So we want to talk about biblical poetry soon here. So the thought is for Module 3, we will continue with this format. We'll meet every week, and then we'll just go through how to study and preach biblical poetry and wisdom literature. We'll also cover Proverbs. So in the next module, you'll have your passages you'll have one passage from Psalms, you'll have a Psalm, and then you'll have one passage from the book of Proverbs. Okay, so that's the plan to get to there. And so instead of, since we won't be able to all meet together in person, at least for Module 3, I still want to make progress, have us move forward together, and it'll be fun to do something a little different. We can focus on poetry together for that module, and the format will be the same. We'll continue to meet Tuesday mornings from 10 to noon, and Lord willing, in a few months, we'll get through the third module. In that module, I'll discuss more details when we get together in a couple weeks about that, but I'm just giving you a preview of what's to come. So here's our schedule. Primary matters is what is due this week, and then at the end of Holy Week, try to get your sermon document done. If you need a little more time to finish your sermon document, that's okay, I understand. But the goal is to make sure you have your sermon preached by the end of April. Actually, that would be April 30th. Okay? And for that, you can, as you guys did before, everyone was able to record their sermon, and you sent me a link, and that worked fine for me. So we'll do it the same way as you did for your first sermon. Just record yourself either from preaching in your church, or just record yourself at home or in your office preaching the message. All right. So if you preach your message, if you record it, for me, it's got to be 30 minutes. All right. If you are recording a message you're preaching for your congregation, then you can use, it can be whatever length you would normally do for that. Okay. So it's the same parameters apply for the second passage as the first, as far as recording it, sending to me, 30 minutes for a message that you're just recording for me. It can be longer if it's for your people. All right. Any questions on that, on the schedule, on the second sermon? Everybody's okay? Okay, good. Let's focus our attention and
so far.
Review. Oh, I'm sorry, Michael, did you have a question?
I said none so far, Pastor Tim.
Oh, okay. Okay. Oops, let's get back to the top. All right, this is the primary matters. And basically, it's the remaining steps after you do your narrative analysis, the character setting, the character analysis, the setting analysis, the scene analysis, the plot analysis. Those are the previous assignments. The fifth assignment is now focusing attention on some of the other elements of study. The first being the structural diagram, which we spent a lot of time looking at different parts of that. And we'll look at it some more in the future as well and continue to learn things there. But for this assignment, I want you to do a structural diagram. Now, again, remember, only for the important, like the instructional portions of your passage. You don't have to do a diagram for the whole narrative. All right, that really isn't helpful. But there are certain parts of the narrative that it can be helpful to do. For example, any instruction, if Jesus is teaching something, that's always a good part of your story to diagram. All right. And in the passage in John 4, there were 3 parts to that story where Jesus gave instruction. And so those would be the verses that we would want to diagram. Okay. Because again, remember, diagramming is best suited for instructional texts like epistles or even poetic passages. Those are instructional. But in stories, not all of the story is instructional, right? But there may be parts in the story that are instructional. So now if you were studying the Sermon on the Mount, the whole sermon is instruction, right? It's a sermon. So you would want to diagram that as you're studying that passage. But many times in the stories, there's many parts of it that aren't necessary to diagram. Narrator comments, even the dialogue isn't really that necessary, or background information, but anything that is more instructional in nature. All right. That's what you want to diagram, and you'll follow the process, the steps that we've been focusing on for a few months in our workshop, where you identify the independent clause first, and then identify the rest of the phrases and clauses by looking for those connector words, which are the conjunctions, prepositions, relative pronouns, and participles, or punctuation. And then you want to indicate each phrase, what each phrase and clause modifies and how, and then align it up under words. So we'll look at an example in a minute of that. But hopefully none of this is new information, guys. So hopefully this is just review. But I want to go over it in case there are any questions that come to your mind, because it has been a little bit since we did the previous passage. So the first step in primary matters, do the diagram, again, only for important dialogue or didactic or instructional statements within the story. Okay. The next.
So, Pastor Tim.
Yeah.
Only the instructional portion.
Yes. So
when you say didactic, Pastor Tim.
Yeah.
Could you elaborate a little on that? Didactic.
Yeah, didactic comes from the Greek word to teach,
yes.
didasko. And so it's just a word that means instructional. I should put that. instructional, or you might hear some people say didactic. That just simply means something that is teaching something. That's what didactic means. So, for example, if you are, what was your passage? Your John passage.
chapter 2, John chapter 2, Pastor Tim, 1 to 11.
Okay, so if we look at John 2 here, there's really not much here that's like direct instruction. So honestly,
I was about to ask Pastor Tim, how about those portions where you have instructions or teachings that are implied
yeah, there's nothing here. What you're looking for is something that would be, you know, a few sentences long that you would want to see the structure to it because it's instructional. But honestly, in John 2, there's nothing here that I would diagram. What were some of I know some of you guys had John 5, 1 to 18.
1 to 18.
Yeah. It's mostly just short dialogue here. So
yeah,
there's nothing here that
how about Pastor
what's that? Maybe verse 18 because it's an important statement. I'd probably diagram verse 18. I would diagram because yeah, 1 second here. He makes this for this reason and then for this reason, therefore. Yeah, I probably would diagram 15 to 18 because that's a part where it looks like the narrator's giving some important information to the reader. Yeah. So I'm sorry, Bobby. What?
Pastor Tim, that's outside already of my, my verse is only up to verse 11.
Correct. Yeah, for John 2, I didn't see anything there that really would be helpful to diagram. Because they're all short statements back and forth and short comments by the narrator. But John 5 here, I think verses 15 to 18 would be worth diagramming. John 6, I think some of you have that one. John 6, I would probably diagram the last verses 12 to 14, because again, it's some statements by the narrator that I think might be helpful to diagram. Who else? What other passages did anyone else have a different passage from those three?
John 12, Pastor Tim.
John 12.
1 to 8.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe verses 7 and 8. Verses maybe 5 through 8. I would suggest that.
Okay. 5 to 8.
Now, and again, what I do for diagramming, when I have a quote, I put the quote in a box. So for example, like I would say here, let's do this. So on say verse 7 here, notice it's a quote. If I were diagramming that part, I would do it this way. So you have a therefore, so that's connecting up to verse 6. Therefore, Jesus said, and then really what's in quotes is the object of what he said, right? So I would do this. I put it down here and then put a box. This is what I do for any quotes. Just to, so I put the whole quote in a box like that. I mean, of course, finish the diagram here. And then that just shows me visually everything in the box is what he said. All right. You don't have to do that, but I recommend I do this. I put a box around anytime there's a dialogue, there's a quote, or if there's a quote of an Old Testament verse, I'll put a box around it just as a visual reminder to me that this is a quote or the author's quoting something, either saying something directly or quoting from something else. All right. So I would use that convention. So something like this would be what that verse might look like. Of course, you have the other verses around it you'll be diagramming, but something like that. Okay. So do that for whenever you diagram quotes. All right. So your structural diagram, and I'll show you example from John in a minute. Then after that, after you diagram some of the key verses within your story, again, focus on instructional verses or maybe some important statements that the narrator makes, as I gave you some examples from your passages. Then what you want to do is pick at least 5 words, okay, now 5 at least, from your story. Pick 5 significant words to do a word study on. All right, and you guys did a real good job with this in your last assignment. So just follow this format again, where you look up the word, the Strong's number. I think Bible Hub is a really good resource.com. And how's the word? Look up the definition there. Then also identify other verses where the word is used. And again, look first for other verses in the book of John where that word is used. Other areas, other verses that John used that word. Okay, look first there. And identify how the word is translated in other translations. Look up the word used in other passages. Again, try to find at least 10 passages, starting with other times in the Gospel of John. And then this is key, summarize the meaning of the word in the context of the passage and summarize it in a sentence or two, again, in your own words. Don't just give me all the definitions and other verses it's in. I want you to take all that information and look again in the context of your story and summarize what you think the word means in that context, all right, in a sentence. All right, so just have these 4 sections here, all right? You'll have the Strong's number with the definition that you find online at, say, Bible Hub. Then put how that word's translated in at least 4 or 5 other English translations. Then identify other passages where the word is used. So that's the 3rd section. And then lastly, summarize that all in one sentence, what the word means. Okay. And from what I remember before, most of you guys did a good job with that. So again, we'll look at an example here from John in a moment in my passage. In the 3rd step, this is where you're going to consult resources. And what I want you to do here for this step, in your study, you're going to read through and draw out anything from those resources that you find helpful and put that, make note of that yourself on your computer or write it down. For the assignment, all I want to do is know what resources you used. Okay? Again, just list the resource you used, the author, the page numbers, the web address. just show me that resource. You don't have to put everything down that you got from the resource. For me, that's for your study and your notes. All right. And then finally, look at all your assignments up to this point, the background context, the literary context, all the narrative steps, the character setting, plot, scene analyses, your diagram information, word studies, resources. Take all of that and identify the what and the why and the how from the author. Okay, so again, the what will be, after looking at this story, after studying all these elements in the story, what is the main point that the author is making? And then secondly, why is he making that point? Why is the story there? So if you're doing John 3, and Nicodemus, don't just say, the author's main point is be born again. That is the key theme, but give a little bit more information. Jesus tells Nicodemus what it means to be born again. Now, why does John put that story there? Why does the author make that point there? You would say something along the lines, because John wants to show us what true belief is, right? Because remember, that's a key theme in the Gospel of John. Your story, every story is linked to his purpose in John 20, verse 30 and 31. Right? These things I have written so that you may know Jesus is the Christ, the Son of the living God, and that believing you may have life in his name. So in John 3, if you're preaching on that story, Jesus tells Nicodemus to be born again in order to show us what true faith or what true belief is, or something like that. All right? But do this for your story. How does your story fit? What is it doing there? Not only what is the point, but why is he making it? So like I told you last time, for John 5, it's not just the miracle of, in John chapter 5, when he does the healing at Bethesda, it's not just the healing that's significant there. That is an important event, but that's not the main point of that story. All right? The main point of that story is, one, in contrast to he showed us the Samaritans in chapter 4 and what true faith looks like, true belief. Here in John 5, he's now introducing those who do not believe. So he's going to be showing examples of what unbelief looks like. All right. So this story is not just a miracle, but he's setting up a very important theme in John, which is, unbelief. And unbelief rejects Jesus as the Christ, the Son of God. And in John 6, again, if you have the first part of John 6, feeding of the 5,000, the story is not just about Jesus performing this incredible miracle. Certainly that happens, but we have to ask ourselves, what's the main point here? And again, that's where you need to understand the rest of the chapter. Or if you have John chapter 2, the main point there is not just that Jesus turned water into wine. How does that story connect to John's purpose in the book? What's the significance of that particular miracle? All right, so that's the what and the why. The how is really the broken up by the scenes in your story. Now, if you only have one scene, there might be a couple of movements in that scene, like a part where Jesus speaks one section, and then a part where someone else speaks in another, or something like that. Okay? So again, the how here is not the sermon points that you're making. The how is simply, how did the author develop the story, the different scenes in the story, which helps us to see the main point of the story. All right. So again, I emphasize this is, at this step, you're just putting the author's main point, why he wrote it, and then the outline through the scenes. For your sermon, that will come in when you do your sermon document. You'll need to come up with the sermon main point and outline. All right, but in this step, it's the authors that we're focusing on. Okay, so that's just an overview. Those are the 4 steps you need to include in this assignment. Let's go through and review John chapter 4 and the format, these 4 steps, and how I applied it to the John 4 example. Okay, and again, I will give you this my example here for assignment 5, so that you can use it to follow in terms of format, and if you have any questions. Okay. All right, so let's go through the example, and then if you have questions, specific ones, you can ask me, or if a question comes up from your passage that comes to your mind on this particular step, please feel free to ask. All right. Now for your diagram, which is step 1 here, notice I chose, in my passage in John 4, I chose 4 particular parts in that story. These were all the instructional parts that Jesus gave. The first 2 were to the woman at the well, verses 13 and 14, and then 21 to 24. I diagrammed those because those are specifically instructional passages where he's teaching on something. All right. And then he teaches the disciples in verses 34 to 38. So I also included that as a diagram. And notice here, I just show the actual diagram. You don't have to put all the steps down to do the diagram. You just need to give me the final result. All right. And notice, as I mentioned earlier, I've got a box around the dialogue part, what's in quotes, and then that's the key part of the diagram. All right, and here we can see Jesus makes essentially a contrasting statement. That's his main point. Whoever drinks of this water will thirst again, but whoever drinks of the water I give will never thirst. Those are the 2 contrasting remarks. And then he gives a statement about that particular water. Okay? And I just followed the steps I showed you guys. Identified the main sentence. Everyone will thirst again. Is one in the, and then whoever drinks shall never thirst. So those are the 2 independent clauses. And then all the rest of these phrases and clauses modify another particular word in the sentence. All right. And again, I didn't put all 4 steps down here. I just put the last step, which was the actual diagram. And I did that for verses 13 and 14. I came back and did it for verses 21 and 24. And then I did it for verses 34 to 38. And then notice here, I've got a box inside of a box. Do you guys see that? That is a situation where Jesus makes a statement, which is in the big box, and then within that statement, he quotes somebody else. Do you not say there are 4 months and then comes the harvest? So this inner box is a quote from someone else that Jesus is giving. So that's why I have a smaller box in here. So that helps me visually, because then I can see right away there's a quote inside of a quote here. And then I've got the rest of it I diagrammed out. And this will help me when I get to this part in the story as I'm trying to summarize the point Jesus is making. The diagram helps me to think about what he's saying and how he's saying it here. Okay? So that's the diagram. And we spent a lot of time on diagramming the last few months. But if there are any questions, let me know. Or if you have a question on your passage that you want to ask about, this would be the time to ask me.
Pastor Tim, for example, my passage, John chapter 2, verses 1 to 11, almost all of it is dialogue. Okay.
Right.
And a few narrators comment of of the problem of the wine running out and the dialogue between Jesus and his mother with regards to helping, and then narrator again. So Pastor Tim, in my passage, when I diagram, so I can just do that, put the dialogues in boxes.
Yeah, if you want to diagram this, you're certainly welcome to do that. And yeah, any of the dialogue remarks, like Jesus's mother, she said this, so that will be in a box. Jesus's response would be in a box. And then his mother speaks again. So yeah, you'd have several boxes here for your diagram. And like I said, honestly, I mean, there's not much here I could see much value in diagramming, because it is just a back and forth dialogue. Maybe the last few verses 9 to 11, because that's sort of like the climax of the story there. That might be worth doing.
So, the reason why I asked the question, Pastor Tim, is because I'm trying to position myself to making the sermon outline. So it seems like my sermon outline will be more, at least from how I see it at this point. Probably it will change when I get to the end of the finishing all of the assignments. Like, it might change, but from this point, what I can see is to prepare for my sermon structure. I will have to depend on what we might call figurative implications. So at least from this vantage point, that's how I see it. For example, the figurative meaning of the running out of the wine. How is that in terms of relating it to us? Those are symbolical, figurative, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to want to first just tell the story. And in telling the story, there's going to be some background information you're going to want to include, like, what is the significance of a wedding in that culture? Why was the wine an important feature as part of the wedding? What would it be if a host ran out of wine at a wedding? Why is that a big deal? And obviously, this, we don't know what family it is, but obviously, because Mary is telling the servant, she seems to be involved in coordinating things. It could be somebody they know well. We don't know for sure. The head waiter, who is that guy? What's the significance? Just in the story, what's the significance about his comment, that this wine was good wine? I mean, don't read into those things. Just tell the story. The significance comes from the point of the story. When you get to verse 11, obviously this is the first miracle Jesus performed. And notice because notice again in these stories, guys, look for the words that link to. Let's go back to the purpose statement of the book. Maybe Bobby, you can read this, verses 30 and 31 here.
Therefore, many other signs Jesus also performed in the presence of the disciples, which are not written in this book, but these have been written so that you may believe that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, and that believing you may have life in his name.
So notice the key words that you want to look for in John's gospel, because that's going to link the story to his purpose. Notice signs, believe. In fact, he says believing twice, believe and believing. Christ, or Son of Man, and Son of God. All right? John says here, this is why I've written this gospel, so that you may believe Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God, believing you may have, and here's the other one, life. All right? Look for those words in your story. That will give you an important link or connection. So if we go back to John 2, notice at the end, verse 11, this is beginning of his, there's one of the words, signs, and his disciples believed. So there's two things. John now gives us a hint, well, or a pretty direct statement, why he gives us this story. I don't think there's any hidden or symbolic meaning here, except there's one thing. There's one possibility that I'll mention in a minute. But here in verse 11, the narrator, the author, John, clearly says, look, this is the first of Jesus's signs that he did in Galilee, and his disciples believed in him. So this was not only the first miracle he performed, which pointed to who he is, but also it was a miracle in which the disciples now said, oh, wow, this guy is for real. And so both of those are important elements or principles that John wrote his gospel for. Now, why would Jesus choose a wedding and turning water into wine at a wedding to be his first sign? That's something to give some thought to. It makes me think of not only the communion, the Last Supper, it makes me think of the wedding feast. So I'm not certain, I haven't studied this enough to be convinced, but first you want to tell the story, and you want to show how the story is connected to John's purpose. All right? Now, there may be some elements in the story that teach other particular doctrines, or maybe have some significance as you study it in light of the whole gospel or the whole Bible. But as you're going through the story, I don't think there's any symbolic things going on here with, the fact there are 6 water pots. I think there were just 6 water pots. There was a lot. Jesus made a lot of this stuff, right? 20 or 30 gallons. So you're looking at what, 80 to 100 liters of this stuff. I don't think there's any significance in that number 6 pots or, some of those things. So just be careful that you don't read into it too much, because John's really just telling us this story to show us this was the first miracle Jesus did in Galilee, and it was something that really convinced the disciples that, it encouraged their faith in him. Okay?
Yeah. Okay. That's an interesting story. That's very helpful, Pastor Tim, because it's very helpful to me, because coming from my previous tendencies in my approach to passages, that many times my tendency is to go into those things, the symbolical, the figurative. So that's why I wanted to pick your mind on how to approach this passage. And that was very helpful. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
Thank you.
I think to me, just especially in stories, you know, we want to, if this was a prophetic text, then we might want to consider there might be some figurative language or symbolism here, but this is not a prophetic text. It's not a poetic text. It's a narrative. And so we have to be more careful. That doesn't mean there isn't any figurative language here or symbolism, but we have to be much more careful because there needs to be something in the story that would give a hint or a clue. Like if Jesus
I think you made the
what's that?
I think you made the big point there, Pastor Tim, that this is a narrative.
Yeah.
So it's not primarily emphasizing symbolisms and figures. First and foremost, it is pointing to something because it is a narrative. But for me, that's a big point, with regards to how I approach this passage. Yeah. There might be symbolisms and figures in there, but that's not the main point. Okay. For me, the most significant thing I'm getting from this dialogue now is that's not the big point. The big point is the point of the narrative.
Yeah. Yes.
Okay.
Now, for example, in John 10, Jesus uses some figurative language in the context of a story. Notice he talks about the door of the fold of the sheep. He describes this thief and robber who enters, some other way. And he talks about, then he later describes himself. Notice he says, I am the door of the sheep. Well, that's figurative language, right? He's not a literal door. He's describing himself, though, as the entrance into the sheepfold. And he's comparing himself as the shepherd. The people are like the sheep, and then thieves and robbers are the Pharisees, the Jewish leaders that he's talking to. So knowing who he's speaking to, in fact, notice here, this time it's so, look, the author tells us directly Jesus is using figurative language. You guys see that? So we don't have to guess here. The author's very explicit. And even in the context, we can understand that the figurative language and the thieves and the robbers that he refers to, he's speaking to the Pharisees here. So he's telling here a story where he's the good shepherd and the Pharisees are actually acting like thieves and robbers. And so he's using figurative language, but we can tell within the context of the story, that's what he's doing. Again, that's why I emphasize with you guys, pay attention to what came before, pay attention to what comes after, just to make sure you understand how it goes together. Because there will be clues. Now in John 2, we don't see any extra clues that something figurative is going on here. I think it's simply he's telling a story of the first miracle Jesus performed and the impact that it had on those around him. And then, like I said, there may be some significance to why Jesus chose to do this particular miracle at a wedding feast. But that would take a little more thought and care, since the author doesn't explicitly tell us anything along those lines. Okay?
Yeah. Okay.
All right. Good question. Okay, so the first step then is, again, diagram those instructional parts within your passage, or perhaps important narrator comments, or typically John will, if you'll notice a pattern in John's gospel as well, where he will tend to give some important clues as to the purpose of his story at the end of the story, the last few verses. All right, so often you'll get some clues there. So go ahead and diagram those portions of your of your passage. And for John 4, I chose 3 of them to do. And then the next step for this assignment is your word study. Okay? And again, I lay out the format exactly here, so just follow it. Pick 5 significant words. Now, can you guys tell me what would be a significant word that you would want to choose? What would be some reasons or criteria for choosing a particular word? What makes a word significant, I guess, would be my question.
Repetition.
Yeah. Yeah, if it's repeated, or if a similar word, a synonym's repeated, that's a clue by the author. This word's important. Any others?
Excuse me, sir.
Yeah.
Like for example, sir, in John 6, the narrator include word Passover. So I think it is only one word in that narrative. But for me, it seems important, sir. Even though the author used once.
Passover?
For me, correct if I am wrong.
No, Passover, the author makes a note that Passover, the feast of the Jews, was near, and this story is about food, bread in particular, and then later Jesus is going to talk about being the bread of life. And so, yeah, the Passover is a significant part of this story. Now, the Passover is an event, but yeah, I think that's one to consider. Maybe because this is a purpose statement, Jesus asked a question to test Philip. That word test might be a good word to look up.
Yes, sir.
Okay. So significant words don't have to be repeated words, but obviously a repeated word would be one, but there can be other words in the story that either maybe you don't, they're hard to understand, or because they seem to be connected to the point of the story, that would be an important word as well. Are there any other kinds of words that would be significant words to do a word study for?
That the one you mentioned, Pastor Tim, earlier, in answer to my question, when words are connected with the purpose of the author.
Okay, yeah.
When the word is connected with the purpose of the book.
Yeah, if you see the word sign,
Verse 2.
notice that word is sign is here in verse 2. That would be a good word to look at. So yeah, words that are significant to the purpose of the book. Any others?
And also verse 14.
14.
Live.
Yeah. So sign actually is repeated here. Okay. So in this passage, yeah, sign would be one. Any other?
Another word, Pastor Tim, is believe.
Yeah, believe. Definitely. That's a word you're going to want to study, and it's probably going to be in your story. I know it's in yours in John 2. Sometimes if there's a word in your story you don't understand, it may not be an important word or not, but if you don't understand it, that would be a word to look up, right?
Yeah, like
Strange words.
Strange words,
like
yeah.
like a thing that is not with the same term with regard to what you're using right now. Let's say, for example, for money, we're using different currency, and their currency like denari, something like that.
Yeah.
Team.
Yeah, if you look at denarii and go, I'm not familiar with that word. I know it has to do with money, but how much is it? What's it? That might be a word you want to look up.
Another positive in my passage is good wine. What's a good wine? No.
Oinos. Vino
Why did
in Italian.
why did they save it the good? Yeah. Why did they save the good wine? What's the good wine?
What's the good wine?
So they were not serving the good wine in the beginning. Does that necessarily mean they were serving bad wine?
Yeah.
Really, no, sir.
Yes. So
it's a way of tricking the guest.
Yeah, exactly.
Another
Save the base
another
for the
thing
last.
after him.
Yeah, Alan.
Another thing after him is words that raise questions about a doctrine.
Okay,
For
yeah.
example, that God, in my passage in the book of Jonah, that God relented. In other translation, it says that he repented. So it makes the reader curious about that word and dig up on the doctrine of God's immutability, something like that.
Yes. Yeah, that's a good point, Alan. If there's a word there that seems significant in regards to a particular doctrine, and here, yes, when it says God relented, what does that mean? Yeah, in ESV it says God relented. The NIV it says God relented. New King James. Oh, so all of these are using the same word. I think the King James Bible has, is it the King James that says repented? Yeah. So the Old English, uses the word repented. So that would be an important word study to do as well. And then also too, if sometimes if you look at different translations and you see that a translation that they disagree on a word, how to translate it, that would be a word you'd want to look up as well. Okay. So repetition, theological significance, connection to the purpose of the book, strange words that don't understand, maybe words that interest you. Those would all be good reasons. Words that have different translations. Those would all be good examples of significant words. Now in John chapter 4, I chose the word worship because he's used it 8 times in those 5 verses 20 to 24. And worship is a significant theological concept, right? What is worship? So for those 2 reasons, I chose that word in my example from John 4. I looked up on Bible Hub, right? And again, I think you guys know how to do this. Do you need me to show you just an example, or I think everybody's familiar with it? Go to the interlinear section on Bible Hub and just click on the Strong's number above your word. That's what I did. And so I got this basic definition here to do reverence to, from the Greek word pros, to or towards, and kuneo, which means to kiss. So to kiss towards is the literal translation. How it's translated in New American Standard, and then Thayer. They had the Thayer's definition there on Bible Hub. So I wrote that down. So these are all just the basic definitions, translations of the word. And then I went over to blueletterbible.org and I did the same thing. They have a Vines translation lexicon there, so I use that. All right, so all of this is just information on definitions that I got online from Bible Hub and Blue Letter Bible. Okay, so it's giving me a general feel for the different way that the word is used. Then I went to all the English translations. I looked at 8 of them, and notice all of them translate the word as worship. So I'm not going to
that
come
in
up
your
with anything
example,
different.
Pastor Tim.
What's that?
I saw that in your example, uh, the example that you sent us
Yeah.
on how to do a word study.
Oh, from the other translations, they all translated the same? Is that what you're saying?
I'm just saying that that's your example,
Oh, yeah. Okay.
the example that you gave us.
Yes. Yeah, this is the one from assignment 5 I gave before. And then I put, how is the word used in other passages? Notice I put, I just looked up passages that John, from John's books, either in the book of John, John's Gospel, or Revelation. And just picked up, like, these are 10 passages. And then I went further and just looked up the other times the word was used in the Gospels. And I noticed sometimes it's translated bowed down, other times worshiped, bowed down. And then I made a comment here. Out of all the times it's used, New American Standard translates as worship, sometimes bow. And these are just my comments here. I remembered Psalm 2, where it said, kiss the Son was a literal translation of that. So that's the idea of this, showing reverence and respect. I found one more lexical definition from, and then what I did is just gave my summary. Okay. And I put it, I actually had 4 sentences here, 3 or 4 sentences. You can summarize it in 1 sentence if you want, but I wanted to, and notice I said here in John 4, because I want to translate the word in the context of the passage. Okay? So just follow this format. Get the definitions, look up the other translations, look up how it's used in other passages, and then if you want any other information you want to put in there, that's fine, and then summarize it. Okay? And I did this only for 1 word in the example. You'll need to do it for at least 5 words in your passage. Okay? You can do more than 5 if you want, but do at least 5. All right, any questions on that? All right. Yeah, hopefully this is just review. We've done this before. Now that 3rd step in this assignment is to consult resources. And again, notice I just put the resource. All the things that I got from these resources, I put down on another document. But for this assignment, just tell me the resource. So notice I have the author, then I have the book, and then the page numbers. And then for sermons, I just put the title of the sermon and the link. Okay, so I have a few sermons at the end. I have obviously some commentaries here. Then I have a pictorial encyclopedia. All right, you may have some particular, I could have had a book on worship or something like that. And then I had the sermons, okay? So just list for me that information. the resources you used. And then finally, the authors, what, why, and how. Okay, and notice what I did was I put a little background information. The focus of the story is the mission of Jesus, in contrast to his encounter with Nicodemus. So I placed it in the literary context here, and then I put the explicit what, why, and how. And in my case, the what was Jesus was sent on a mission, and a mission he intends for his disciples. And why? To show he's the Savior of all people. Savior there being connected to Christ.
Pastor Tim,
Yes.
pardon me.
No, no problem.
My screen here, I don't know if it is just me, but my screen is still on Logos.
No, sorry about that. That was my fault. Thank you.
Okay.
So I went through the whole word study. Nobody said anything.
That's why I was. No, I thought it was just my screen. So, but I was bothered already.
So everybody's punishment is I have to do the whole word study all over again now, because nobody said anything. So yeah, I'm just in my own world here, I guess.
No, but I got it, Pastor Tim. Okay?
Okay.
For one thing, I got it. No, so you said that in the word study, we should do at least 5 of those significant words.
Yeah.
Okay. Words that are often repeated, words that relate to the author's point in the whole book and in the passage we are examining ourselves, words which has theological implications and all of that. Then you said that we could do more than 5 if we want. Okay. And also you said that it's important that we put the reference where we got our sources.
Yes.
So those I got. Okay. Then you moved on to the next point of the how, why, and what of the author.
Yeah. Exactly. I'll get back to that. Here's just and I'm going to send this document to you guys, but this is the word study that I was talking about, where the definitions, the other translations, and then the other passages that the word is used in, and then my summary. And then, yeah, for the resources, here's what I was describing. Okay, just put the resources down. Okay. And then finally, yes, the authors, what, why, how. Okay. And then the how, because I did the whole chapter or most of the chapter, the how is really the outline of the scenes. Okay. Now I could have put under, because this is how you're going to tell the stories. You're going to just walk them through by scenes, or if you only have one scene, like for example, when he speaks to the Samaritan woman, you have sort of Jesus discusses the living water, and then Jesus discusses true worship, and then Jesus discusses well, those were the yeah, I think those were the 2 main parts to their discussion, if I remember right. So you could do that as well, but the how really is just sort of the outline by scenes or by key parts within the scenes if you only have one scene in your story. And again, that's the authors. All right. And again, the what and why is, what is the author's main point and why does he express that main point? Okay. Your sermon main point and your outline will be in your sermon document, which we'll talk about in a minute. Okay, so just follow this format for your John passage. And okay. Any questions on that? Hopefully it's just review. All right, let's talk about, because we're not going to meet next week, I did want to discuss your sermon document a little bit, but I wanted to do that mainly by just discussing again, reminding ourselves of oh shoot, where are we at? Reminding ourselves of some important principles for preaching narratives. Okay. Part of this will be review, but now that you preached a narrative from your Jonah or Ruth passage, now that most of you have done that, I wanted to talk again about this preaching narratives and preaching narratives as stories. Okay. Now, when we talk about preaching narrative, when I say as a story, what do I mean by that, you think? Preach narratives as stories. Why don't I just say preach narratives? We're going to talk about preaching
As it
narratives.
happens, as it is narrated in the Bible.
Okay, can you expand on that?
Like your comment.
As for me, Pastor Tim, based on your comment on my root sermon, you pointed out that we should really be going through the stories. We should progress according to the progression of the story. We should be highlighting the highlights of the story. So that's what I got from your comment in my sermon. Okay? Although you said I did a good sermon, but I, at least from what I got from you, it's not how it should really be going down.
Oh yeah,
as far as the narratives is concerned. Yeah, as far as the narrative is concerned, I think I don't know if you were explicit there, but I got it by implication that your comment was, it seems like I handled my passage through chapter 4 like I was handling an epistle. You know, the way I structured and I preach it as if I was handling an epistle. So you were not so explicit with that, but that's something I got. You can correct me if I'm wrong there, Pastor. But at least that's what I am getting it. So what I got from your comment was, preach the narrative as a narrative, as a story. And then right down at the end, you made the comment there. Right down at the end, that's where you make all of it significant. Right? When you come down to the end, that's where you really make it all significant and relevant to your audiences. Okay, so that's how I got your point, Pastor Tim.
Yeah, that's a good. That's exactly what I wanted to tell you. I thought the message was good, and it was a good. You focused on redemption and some of the elements of redemption, which they were helpful and it was right on. But it came across like, it was just, I forget how many, but 3 principles of redemption from the story of Ruth. So it wasn't really focused on the story and how it leads us to what the author wanted to say about redemption, but it was sort of like theological gleanings as you were going through the story. And I think that's a common approach that we all take, especially when we preach epistles for a while, and then we go to some other part of the Bible, we can tend to preach in the same way in our minds, our mindset. Like, okay, I'm looking for the doctrinal truths, and I'm just going to outline this passage based on those doctrinal truths, as opposed to telling the story. And as the story unfolds, like, you know, when we watch a movie, you don't often see somebody come up and put an outline point after 10 minutes in the movie, right? They don't like tell you directly, okay, this is the point here. And then 10 minutes later, another, you know, the movie director doesn't put on there, you know, okay, this is the second point. And then right, they just show the story. And then at the end of the story, we're meant to sort of, okay, what was I supposed to understand from that story as a whole? So I want you
it's
guys
something,
to
Pastor Tim.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I'm sorry, Pastor Tim. But if I may add, it's something I have not grown used to. That's why in your comment, it opened me up to, you know, that whole point there. You know, I appreciated it because it opened me up to that. You know, because my tendency is to handle everything like an epistle. You know, that's the view where I'm coming from. So when you pointed out that narrative should be handled as a narrative, so it's something that I need to orient myself with. You know, it might take a while for me, but it is something that now has opened me up to set myself to and work on it so that I can handle it that way.
Yeah, I think I sent you guys a link to one of John MacArthur's sermons on the prodigal son, right? Did I send that link to you?
Yeah.
Listen to his fourth. He did a 4-part series on the prodigal son. And listen to the 4th message. I thought John did a very good job. Pastor John did a very good job of, I don't want to give it away. The way he ends it, very effective, very effective. So that'd be one example I'd point you to listen to is, as you're reading the story, it's like in Jonah, right? It doesn't really end. There's this question, right? At the end of the last verse, should I not have compassion? And there's no answer from Jonah. Nothing else is said. It just ends with a question. And, or in the book of Ruth, it ends with that genealogy, which is a strange ending to such a wonderfully written story. And it leads us to, you know, when we get to the whole story and we get to that end, it's like, what's the point here? And this is where I just want you to try this, guys. And this goes to, I'm glad you said that, Pastor Will, because this really goes to the other thing I want to remind you guys of. Oops. Is this it? Yeah. Is try to preach this next sermon inductively. Okay? A deductive sermon, remember, who can tell me what a deductive sermon is? You guys remember? Anyone remember a deductive sermon?
From general to specific.
Yeah, from general to specific. And the general, a deductive sermon, right, gives the give the declaration or the main point at the beginning, and then show it from the text. Okay, so in today's story, we're going to see the story of redemption, right? Look at the Ruth 4 and how God redeems us. All right, so you're kind of given the point of the story up front, and that's fine to do. It's perfectly fine to preach a deductive sermon from a narrative. But what I want you to try to do, because I think this will help you guys tell it more like a story, is do an inductive sermon. That is moving from the specific to the general, meaning you tell the story, but you don't give the point of it away. You just tell a story, let it unfold, and then lead. So you basically lead the hearer to the main point of the story. So you're almost kind of keep the main point sort of hidden a little bit. You know, maybe you can hint at it, but don't give it away yet, because what can be really, really powerful is when your hearers, through the story, begin to see the point of the story, rather than you just directly telling them at the beginning. So then they're sort of expecting it. It's like, okay, I'm going to look for redemption here. I'm going to look for, compassion or whatever. If you don't give away, you just start telling the story. One day there's this prophet named Jonah, and God tells him to go to Nineveh, and he says no. And why would he do that? So he runs off on a ship, and so you tell the story and then sprinkle some questions throughout the story. Like, why would Jonah do that? What would make him disobey God like that? Why would he go get on a ship? And, why did he say this? And so you're getting people into the story, right? By doing that. So ask questions, and then you can start revealing toward the end what the point of the story is. And that's often in both Jonah and Ruth, that's exactly what happens. We don't really get the whole point of the story till the end. All right. And so even
Pastor Tim?
Yeah. Go ahead.
Yeah. You just finished first your thought flow, and then I'll ask my question. When you were saying even in the end of the story.
Yeah, like in the John passages, he doesn't really, we don't really know what the story's doing there until the end of the story. Like John 2, he's just telling the story about this wedding feast, and Jesus changed the water to wine. We should be asking, what's John trying to show us here? Is he just showing us a miracle? Is there some significance to this wedding? What's going on here? And then at verse 11, he tells us what he's doing.
My tendency, Pastor Tim, at this point, I don't know, maybe I just want to bring this out. Maybe it will be helpful for all of us.
Sure.
But my tendency, again, coming from handling episodes and those didactic passages, is to bring out significance from every point of as I go along, from every point that I go along. But now you're telling us that leave the significance, or leave the relevance and the significance at the end of the story. Am I right, Pastor Tim? Am I right of what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
Just because, for a couple of reasons. One, I just want you to try telling a story where you're just focused on the main point of the story. You only have 30 minutes if you're doing the recording. And even if you have longer, I just want you to try to unveil the point of the story by telling the story and just focusing on the main point. Now, there may be other points or principles that you see in the story that you think would be important or helpful for your hearers, but I just want you to focus on the main point of the story. If you were doing more messages, you could, bring up these other things that you see in the story, but I'd like you to just try focusing on the main point of the story and, you know, telling the story, leading your hearers to discover that main point. Okay.
Okay. Pastor Tim, my other question is this. When we come to to framing up the sermon, what do you do, Pastor Tim, in regards to introductions of narrative? Okay, can you give us some tips on how we make introduction? Because you taught us before that our introduction should be something that will be catchy. No, it will draw our hearers to our message, and it will set the tone. So, could you give us some tips, Pastor Tim, on what you in doing narratives?
I missed that last part. In doing what?
Doing introduction for narratives. Okay. What works in doing introduction for narratives?
Okay, well, let me just let me see.
How do you make it attractive? How do you make it
all right, let me just I'll try to show you a couple examples of mine, all right, and see if this answers your question. Here's a sermon I did on Ruth. All right, I preached the whole book. I called it A Match Made in Heaven. All right, because that's what people, when they think of Ruth, they think of, right, the whole the marriage, right? So I kind of play on that, because really the match made in heaven is not Naomi or Ruth and Boaz. But people don't know this yet. Okay. So, but they'll be familiar. Oh yeah, Ruth, great love story, right? So I actually started with, because I preached this back in May at my church, talking about the virus, right? That's probably been in all our introductions in the last 50 sermons we've done. But I talked about how it's impacted people. You know, people have died, but not only from COVID, from cancer, car accidents, heart attacks. And then this was my transition. I said, you know what? Life was no different in the Bible, right? People suffered tragedy in Scripture too. And this morning, I want to turn our attention to one such story, the story of an old woman who suffered great loss and struggled to understand it, to make sense of it all, even to the point where she doubted God. Now, her name is Naomi, and we find her story in the book of Ruth. So I just sort of start with this general idea of, you know, there's tragedies in the world, people suffer. Well, that happened in Bible times too. In fact, I want to tell you a story about a particular woman, an old woman who suffered as well. And her name's Naomi. So you see, I don't give anything away, right? I just basically, I'm saying, you know, let's look at this story from this woman named Naomi, who suffered like we suffer. And then I gave a little background of the story. You know, for those of you who know this book well, you may be wondering, you know, the story of tragedy. I thought Ruth was a love story. It's a match made. Here you go. I'm linking to my title. But what does Naomi and her tragedy have to do with it? And then I say, well, the answer is, and here I sort of give a little bit of a deductive, because I tell them that we're going to be reminded of the sovereign hand of God and his work in our lives. Because I thought I wanted to tell a little bit about the point of the story, but I didn't give everything away yet. Okay. Another example. Let me see here. I'll do one from New Testament. I'll do one from John here. John. Let me pick John 9. How's that one? Here's a story I did from John 9. Actually, I did it on on Holy Week for Resurrection Sunday. And so I
Okay,
started my story.
We will see the whole manuscript now.
Yeah, this is a manuscript. John 9, though. Nobody has John 9, so sorry. No one can do copyright here. So this story, I started with just what would it be like to be completely blind? So I just talk about blindness. And, how many blind people are in the U.S.? And then I talked about how Jesus was sensitive to blind people. And in fact, that's the most recorded miracle that he performs. And then I just, very short, and then I just said, this morning, we're going to turn our attention to another blind man that Jesus took special notice of in John 9. So I haven't given anything away. I'm just going to say, we're going to talk about a story about a blind man. And I tried to get attention just by asking a question, what would it be like to be blind? And maybe you could even, if you know somebody who's blind, or if maybe you had an experience of blindness, or something in your life, just as a story to get their attention. But I don't spend a lot of time on the introduction because I'm going to be telling a story. So I want to say just enough maybe to get their attention and then direct them to the passage.
So what I'm getting, Pastor Tim, now, as you explained, is get the whole point of the story, the main gist of the story that we are to preach, and then relate it to something present and something relevant.
Yeah.
Without giving away the point of the story in the beginning.
Yeah, here's what I did for John 4. The need for water. And I just talked about the importance of water, physical water, right? How most of our body weight comes from water. 60% of our body is water. We need it for all these things. And then I transitioned to, and that's true, our body needs water, but Jesus said there's a water we have far greater need of. And he speaks of this water in an engaging conversation he has with a particular Samaritan woman at a well. So again, I don't give anything away, but I start with the topic of water because that's going to be in the story. And hopefully it's interesting enough to get people's attention. And then I just say, let's look at another story about water. And this is one Jesus. And so, then I just give the setting of the story and I tell the story. So, these are just a few examples. Usually my introductions are pretty short because most of my sermon's going to be telling a story. So I don't see the need to tell a long story at the beginning to tell another story. I just maybe want to, talk about something related to the topic, that I'm going to cover, or like in Jonah, when I preach Jonah, I again give a short introduction to that. I did one time when I preached it, I just said, I'm going to give you a word, and I want you to tell me what word comes to your mind when I say this word, Jonah. Did any of you think of a big fish? Right? Everybody, when they hear the word Jonah or the name Jonah, they think of a whale, right? And then I said, well, you know what? Actually, that story is not just about the miracle of Jonah being swallowed by the fish. There's actually a much more important point to that story. And it's one of great significance, and it has to do with, and then so I just start with like one short paragraph, and then we're into the story. So that for narratives, I think especially, I don't have a long introduction, no, typically.
Okay.
But
all right.
Again, you don't have to. You can. There's no rules here. I think for an effective narrative sermon, where you're going to be telling the story, just get us to the story. Get our attention, you know, but you don't have to spend a long time doing that.
Okay.
You know, or if you're telling, you know, preaching from Ruth, you might say, you know, the other day I was watching this love story on the Hallmark Channel, and it reminded me of the book of Ruth. So let's talk about Ruth today. You know, it could be something simple like that. I don't know. You guys have any other thoughts or questions about that?
That's helpful, Pastor Tim.
And two, that'll give you guys, you want to give yourself plenty of time to tell the story. And if you have a long introduction, you're taking away from that. So I think it's, now for a deductive, like an epistle or something, you might want a longer introduction to develop, surface the need and develop some of the theological principles you're going to make. But for a narrative, I think just tell the narrative and then unveil the point as you're telling the story. Or at least try it. See.
Okay.
See how it goes. You know, look at this as an opportunity to do something a little different. And who knows, maybe you'll find that you're an effective storyteller, and that will improve your epistle preaching. Because then you'll be able to present background in an epistle and tell it like a story as well. That can be a very powerful introduction to an epistle. So,
thank you, Pastor Tim.
All right, so give it a try. Try this inductive approach where don't give away everything at the beginning. Try to lead us to what the point of the story is in telling the story. And then that's when you can bring in the application, because once the point of the story is understood, then you can say, okay, well, how does this connect to us today? You know, what can we learn? How can we apply this? You know, so a lot of your application then would come towards the end in that case.
So in the end, Pastor Tim, we can be preceptual. Okay. Then we can be preceptual in the end. After when we now are making application.
Yeah.
Like for example, Pastor Tim, just to be literal, once we begin the role for making the application, then we can leave. We can say, let me leave you 4 things like that.
Yeah, sure.
Then we can go through like that. Okay. All right.
Yeah, so let's say you're preaching from Jonah, right? And at the end, you've unveiled that really the story is not about Jonah, it's about God and God's compassion for the lost, right?
Mm-hmm.
Then you can talk about at this point, and you know your hearers, so you might want to focus on, okay, what are some things that hinder us from showing compassion to the lost? Or what are ways we can cultivate this same compassion for the lost that God has? Or what are things that cause us to struggle with compassion for the lost? Or, so you can think of specific to your hearers, what would be most helpful for them in this topic of compassion. What you can think of some ways that how they could apply that in their situations. Okay. And there might be, so as I think about God's compassion here that I see in the book of Jonah, there's three things that come to mind, and that might be sort of a short, didactic section at the end. But you want people, because what's going to motivate them to evangelism is to see the example of God in that story.
Excuse me.
In Jonah. And then, because that's what I think the author's wanting to do is stir our hearts by showing us God's example.
Okay.
And it,
All
you
right.
know, so same in Ruth. If the focus of Ruth is is God's providence for the good of his people, you know, God working circumstances for the good of his people, and the ultimate good being sending, you know, his Redeemer for us. But you could think about, you know, an application, maybe, you know, what are some ways that you see God's hand at work in your life for good, knowing that this is how he works among his children, even in bad circumstances, you know, or, I mean, there's a lot of ways you could go with that as well, but lead them to the main idea from telling the story. And then, yeah, your application points, you may have some specific ways to apply that for your people.
Okay.
But for this sermon, just, you know, it's so hard. There's often so many things that you can find in a story, especially if you're teaching a large section. Try to really keep your focus on the main point for this particular sermon. If you want to do a longer series later, like Pastor John MacArthur, he did, you know, four sermons on the prodigal son, because he focused on each. He focused on the son, then the father in the story, then he focused on the brother, and so he split it up. But for this sermon, you're just doing the one sermon on your text, so try to keep it focused on the main point.
But you gave us a very important key, Pastor Tim, regarding that, no? And at least from my perception, the key is the main point of the author.
Yeah.
For the whole book. Okay. So
yeah, I thought
that's sort of our guide now. That's sort of guiding point where we should be shaping our main point also. How our story ends. Okay. What should be the conclusion of our story? It has to do with the main point of the author. At least that's how I'm getting it now.
Yeah. And I thought
we cannot arrive at any other point than that.
Yeah, exactly. And as you do that, again, you're going to be, you know, teaching your people how to read stories. I liked Pastor Noor. You know, I listened to his sermon a couple weeks ago, and often he said during the message, you know, what is the author trying to show us here? Or what is the author getting at? And I think when you ask that question, it causes the people that's how you want to teach them not just the passage you're studying, but you want to also be teaching them how to read Bible stories. And I think that was, you know, Pastor Noor was sort of teaching hermeneutics as he was telling the story, because a few times he said, you know, what's the author saying here? You know, and he's very excited. What's the author saying here? What's his point? But that's good. That's drawing people to, like, you know, what is the author trying to tell me? Not what, you know, what do I want to see here, or what do I think is being said? So I think that's part of why I'm wanting you to do this, is it'll help if you're consistent in how you teach stories to your people. It's going to show them how to read stories as they're studying the Bible. So.
Can I say something?
Yeah.
Can I say something? Yeah,
sure.
I learned a long time ago there is a difference between Bible story and a story from the Bible.
Yeah.
The Bible story is just that is usually the Sunday school thing that children, which now I also am correcting that. But the story from the Bible, that is God telling us something.
That's a good way to put it. I like that. Yeah, there's a difference between a Bible story and a story from the Bible. Yeah, that's helpful.
Man.
Okay. So, like I said, so this week, try to focus on that 5th assignment, and then the next couple weeks, get your sermon document done so that you can preach your sermon in April, by the end of April. Get that done. Okay, and if, so we've already done that before, so hopefully there's no questions there. Just do the same thing that you did before. We won't meet next week for Holy Week, but we will be back together the following Tuesday, which is the
13th. April the 13th.
Yeah. Yeah, I think we'll be together then, Lord willing, and we can. I'll talk more about Module 3 then, and we can maybe look at do some talk about some other things for that as you prepare for your second sermon. Okay.
Okay. All right. Yes.
Okay. Well, hopefully that was answered some of your questions or was helpful a little bit. I know sometimes
very helpful.
Sometimes reviews can be boring, or kind of like a challenge, but
so Pastor Tim, we won't be having a session next week, that is March 30. So we'll be having it on the following.
Yes, we will. But no, Pastor Alex.
Oh, right.
Brother Alex.
6,
we will
13.
have Station of the Cross. Next week we will have Station of the Cross.
Yeah, you're correct.
Okay,
Alex, you're correct.
We will.
There's no
6.
So the 6th, we'll be back together on the 6th. Yeah.
On the 6th.
6.
Yeah. No
Next
meeting.
week we will have Station of the Cross.
Yeah. Okay, we'll follow you, Pastor Bobby.
On your knees.
No, we will begin at your house.
Walking on your knees.
Station on the Cross.
I have a carpenter. Let me make a cross first.
Okay, so yeah, thanks for the clarification. No meeting on the 30th, which is next Tuesday, and we will be back together on the 6th.
April 6th. Okay. Wow, it's a good thing you pointed that out, Brother Alex.
Thank you.
Okay.
It's going to be a long vacation.
All right. Well, Alex, you want to, since you're the man of the hour, you pointed that out. You want to close us in prayer?
Yes, sure. Okay, let's all pray. Lord Heavenly